You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we challenge the status quo of the food industry, celebrate good food founders who are building businesses on their own terms, introduce industry disruptors, and are redefining equitability. If you're ready to build your financial confidence and join the good food revolution to change the way the food industry does business, you are in the right place. I'm the Good Food CFO and your host, Sarah Delavan.
Sarah, I'd love to start with some news today.
Yeah, let's do it.
General Mills and Walmart team up to accelerate regenerative agriculture.
Okay.
Right there, initial thoughts, initial reaction.
I mean, my initial thought is I want to know how. I just want to know the details.
So let me just read you some of the kind of top line items from this article. So General Mills will work with Walmart to accelerate the adoption of regenerative agriculture across 600,000 acres by 2030. The collaboration will fund projects that seek to advance more sustainable farming practices for wheat and other crops in 7 U.S. states, including Colorado, Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and South Dakota.
Can I stop you there? Because there's a difference. Something that just stood out to me is that there is a significant difference between sustainable farming and regenerative farming. So just calling out a little orange flag.
And then they go on to say that the grants will be administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The 600,000 acreage target is roughly the amount of land General Mills relies on to source key ingredients for products sold through Walmart and Sam's Club stores.
Okay, so where my mind goes with what you've read so far is to a couple of different places. One, that question of regenerative versus sustainable and sort of what is it really?
What are the actual practices that they're using?
Exactly. Number two, I am not an expert at farming. My knowledge comes from visiting farms, the days when I owned my own business and was sourcing for sustainable food businesses. And from what I understand, having a monocrop, right? So like acres upon acres upon acres of the same crop. I don't know how you make that a regenerative situation without animals or, other things on that land. So I question that a bit. I get that land is currently being used to grow wheat to put into cereal. But what if we changed that farmland into farmland that had a variety of produce and animals on it? Would that help to combat what we read in a different article, which was the quote, necessary evil of ultra processed foods?
Yeah.
Right. So this idea that fresh foods are so expensive and ultra processed foods are inexpensive, and therefore these ultra processed foods are necessary because people of a certain,
income
exactly can't afford fresh food. So we have to give them this ultra processed, unhealthy food. When you read 600,000 acres for wheat to go into cereal, what if that land was used to produce fresh food instead of grains that are going to be turned into liquid sugar or cereal?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which undoubtedly will have high fructose corn syrup or something in it as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a myth. It's a fallacy. I'm not sure what the right word is, that we need ultra processed food. I think corporations make money on ultra processed food, and therefore that's what they want to make available to lower income households and individuals.
We could talk about this all day, right, and go in so many directions with this, but I think there's also something to be said about how a certain income level in today's environment that continues to raise and raise and raise and raise, it is based around greed. It's not for any of our health.
No, it also, I mean, if you look long chain or long term, right, there's also a lot of money in making or keeping Americans unhealthy. So let's start here with food, this necessary, and making air quotes here, ultra processed food Let's focus on that. Let's make that more available to people because they can't afford healthy, or I shouldn't even say healthy, but natural foods like fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And then they'll be unwell as they age, and then the health industry will make
It's over.
money, right? Listen, we can go on about what we think about these companies, but what it comes back to, right, is what we're talking about now is exactly why we're here doing what we're doing, and
Yep.
exactly why all of the founders who are listening to this podcast are doing the work that they're doing, because there is a lack of trust in our food system. Like we don't want to participate, right? That like the farmers markets, that are trying to bring whole foods to people, no, like even of the lowest income
Mm.
brackets, right? SNAP and WIC and people fighting for those types of dollars to be used at farmers markets, to be used at grocery stores. The CPG brands and the caterers and the meal delivery companies that are part of our community, we're all fighting to get whole foods into more homes. And when we do create a processed food, it's not ultra processed and it's also not void of nutrients, right? So I think the difference between a big corporation like a Walmart and a Pepsi and our good food founders is that we have a human's best interest in mind when we're creating our product, as well as the land, as well as all of the people along the supply chain, right? All of the things that we stand for and strive to help businesses achieve.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to talk about articles like this because on one hand, you could say, well, good, maybe it'll be better than the current, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
farming, perhaps. But at the end of the day, we want better.
And we want real transparency,
Mm-hmm.
not a bunch of buzzwords,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
not a bunch of, fluffy language that makes us feel good,
Yeah.
but
Like,
real true transparency.
yeah. And what I think is interesting is, we're sharing an episode that was recorded live with Katie Mleziva inside of our Plus membership.
Yeah.
And she's sharing a lot about brand strategy. And we talk about the importance of brand strategy and how the work that she's done with our clients and our community members, especially those who are part of the CFO office hours, like how their work with Katie has impacted their ability to do the financial work in their business, their ability to get really clear and to communicate with their audience, right? To understand who are the people who want my product and how do I communicate to them in a fully transparent way and in a way that fully aligns with who they are and the brands that they are trying to create, right? So it's kind of a great, I don't want to say like a yin and a yang type of thing, right? To be talking about a Walmart and a Sam's Club and this sort of big news, there's some inauthenticity there and there are bigger things we need to be striving for. And now we've got a conversation with Katie that we're about to air that people can absolutely walk away with, a list of things that they can do, right? To improve or to support getting their brand into more consumers' hands, right?
Yeah.
Because the more we do that, the more the food industry will change.
And I think, having been a part of that conversation myself when we did record it live, I think that you really lasered in on a very important word, and that was authenticity. And I think a lot of the conversation with Katie and what she's really encouraging founders to do through her steps, right, is to really get down to the authentic you.
Yeah.
And to be able to take that authenticity, put it into words, right, and communicate it to your audience.
Yeah.
It's not just to help them get in front of more people or their brands into more people, but to really help them be authentic in who they are.
Yeah. and their approach to not just communicating, but their business as well. Right. And I think that's something else that people will hear through this conversation is when you tap into that authenticness of who you are and what you want to create and your why, right? That it provides so much clarity for the rest of your business in terms of where do you want to show up? Where do you want to promote and sell your product? You know what I mean? And how do you truly want to communicate with people? And I have seen it firsthand, as you'll hear in the discussion, the aha moments, the breath, of like that big exhale of, I got it now. We can move forward. So
yeah.
I'm super excited for folks to listen to this episode.
All right. Well, Sarah, let's get to it then.
Want to be a part of conversations like this? You can join Sarah and I live every Tuesday inside the Good Food CFO community as we talk about news in the food industry, community updates, and answer your questions. Not a member yet? You can join us at thegoodfoodcfo.com/join.
Katie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be back.
I want to just quickly recap what our first conversation was about. You joined me for episode 23. Gosh, it feels like forever ago now. And we talked about building a business on your own terms. This is something that has always been, at the forefront of the work that both of us do. And particularly as we talk about building sustainable businesses and lasting businesses and businesses that, people want to run and are, happy to be a part of, right? Day in and day out. And so we talked about the benefits of creating a business that align with both your personal goals and your financial goals. We talked a lot about things that founders can consider in order to get clear on their business vision and how having a clear vision and a purpose and values can impact key decision making. And today, I invited you back because I'll share this. We have one-on-one clients and coaching clients that, are working to build a business on their own terms. They have a vision for their business, but it's not fully flushed out. And what seems to happen is that they struggle to make decisions, financial decisions, general strategic decisions. And I found that some of our clients were having this issue and we really couldn't move forward in our work together. And so I sent them to you. And after a couple of months, they came back with clear minds, clear visions, and the ability to make decisions like very quickly. They knew what they wanted. And in turn, we were then able to make financial decisions, ones that they kind of like hemmed and hawed over previously, right? They were able to say, yes, this is what I want. This is the price, right? Or this is the channel I'm leaving and this is the channel I'm entering. It was amazing. It was like night and day. Mm-hmm. So after I saw it a couple of times, I was like, we got to get Katie back on the podcast because I need to know what is this work that she is doing, and other people need to know about this too. So I'm beyond excited to have you here today and to have you here with a live audience that they can kind of ask questions and tap into this knowledge as well.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, honestly, nothing makes me happier. I love this work so much and I get really invested in the people that I'm working with. Making an impact is what it's all about. And then knowing that when they turn around and work with you or other partners or vendors, that it's really helping align everything that they're working on. That's the goal. So it's so good to hear.
Yeah. So let's kind of recap, if we can, a little bit for folks, the importance of having purpose, vision, and values outlined for the business. And then we'll kind of kick it off from there. So where do you think is a good place to start?
Yeah, well, I will start actually by saying there's a lot of buzzwords around purpose, vision, values, mission statements, things like this, that people often start writing them first for what's going to go on the wall. And I say, do not worry about what's going to go on a wall or your website. Let's first look internally and get these things documented. A lot of times people honestly will have 80% of this in their heads, and it's just all clinking around, and it's just a matter of having a process to put it through and having someone to talk through. I'll ask questions, but we start internally first. I like to say, know thyself. So we look at your company, we look at your competitors, we look at your consumers, but we start internally, because that is really the cornerstone and the foundation for all the future steps. So I do start with purpose. People look at these things in all different ways. There's not just one rule of how to do this, but this is how I do it because it's worked. So, it took a while. The algorithm gets smarter over time, and now I've set the process. So you start with your purpose, because we need to know, why are you getting up every day to do this? We could all get a job for some other company, but we choose to be entrepreneurs. And why is that? What gets you out of bed to run your own business, or to lead a business that you might not own, but that you're making big decisions for? So that's your purpose, the why behind everything that you do. And then your vision is where you're going to be taking that business. So your purpose is your why, your vision is your where, and then your values is your how. So I know we'll talk a lot more about values, so I'll just touch on, or vision, so I'll just touch on the values quick here. I like to write the values in a way that is not just like, well, here's 5 nice words about what I think might be important, communications, that's important about my business. No, specifically, what does good communication or clear communication look like? How do people on your team know if they're living up to those values? And, when you're hiring, you're thinking about if someone's a good communicator. When you're doing a performance review, are they living up to that value? So it's really something that should be, when I say how you're going to get your business to your vision, I really mean it. Like, those are supposed to be guiding principles for you along the way that shouldn't be a surprise to your team. And it's a good way to help know if people are the right people to be working with you towards that vision.
So when you're talking about values, are you sort of framing it in the sense of like how you're going to run your business, or like the things that you're going to take into sort of not only how you operate internally, but also how you communicate and operate externally with other people? Okay.
Yeah, really well said. So it's sort of one of the guides along the way. So when we say how we're going to run it, it's not the tactical plans of we're going to be, distributed here. And it's more about the way that we want people to act, how we want them to bring the business to life, both internally and externally. I start with that being internal, because you can figure out then what you want the copywriting to look like on a wall or a website. But first, just think, what are my principles about how I want this business to run?
Yeah.
So thinking back to vision, then your vision is really so important, because if you're thinking your why is, the fire in your belly about why you're doing this, and then your vision though is, okay, so what are we going to do? Where are we taking this ship that I'm building? What direction are we going to steer? And if you look up how to write a vision statement, there's, a lot of examples for big companies. And we often think, oh, because they're big companies, they must do it really well. But if you read some of them, they are sometimes vague, sometimes really, again, cute copywriting or clever copywriting, but they don't really give us much information. So again, this is just totally my preference, but for the internal version of writing a vision, I like to make sure that we're digging a little bit deeper about really where is it that you want to take your business. So I know in our last episode, we dug into this a little bit deeper, so I don't know how far we want to go, but some of the decisions about, even things like, do you want to be a national brand versus a local brand? Do you want to be a premium product versus a more, day-to-day staple in a pantry?
Yeah.
There's so many different directions that you can take your vision. Do you want to be the one selling, or do you want to have a team doing that for you? There's just, the list could go on, and I'm happy to get into some of those things as we talk, but it's just a matter of making sure that you're capturing those things. I'm a huge fan of writing things down, and we want to write it down first so that you can document the things that where you want to go with the business. And that's a start. It doesn't have to be beautiful at first. It's just a matter of, doing a brain dump on some of these topics related to where you want to go.
Yeah. I want to sort of interject here with just some thoughts. There are times, I think, especially for founders who haven't been a part of the food industry prior to launching their business, there's a lot that they don't know, right? And so you might think, sure, if I could get to be a national brand, I would love to be a national brand, right? Or like a lot of times I see vision statements that are like, I'm just going to use pasta as an example because it's easy. I want to be the number one, gluten-free pasta brand in the country, or I want to be the top selling farmstead pasta brand, like whatever it is, right? Like there's a lot of vision statements that are like, I want to be the biggest. I want to be the number one. I want to be like this very like big thing. I think it doesn't have to be that big to have an impact, right?
Totally true.
And then the other thought I'm having is like, sort of what you're saying is that you want to have an idea of, how big do you want to be, and all the other things we covered in episode 23. And I highly recommend that you go back and check that out if you haven't heard it, or if it's been a while and you want to work through kind of what we're going to talk through here today. But it can also change, right? So if you're someone who's new to the industry, you might think, okay, this is what I want to do. You might give it a shot and go, oh, this isn't working for me, or I don't actually like this, day to day of growing a national brand or whatever. So it's also okay to change your vision, over time. And I know you'll talk a little bit about that. I think the other thing too is, and this is probably because I'm a financial person, but you can run the numbers and help figure some of this out, right? So I'm thinking of a brand right now that has a very, very, I'll call it clean product for lack of better terminology. It's organic, it's local, right? Everything is really top-notch quality that's going into the product. And the minimum price at which she can produce that product is at a premium. And so she needs to sell that product at a premium. So the very facts of what her product is sort of determines where in the market her product will land, right? So I don't know. I'm kind of just sharing these thoughts that are sort of going through my head. I don't know if you have thoughts on any of those things.
What popped into my head as you were saying that, Sarah, is that sometimes there's things that we know and things that we don't know, and recognizing what we're certain of and what we're less certain of can help. So it's like when you're doing a puzzle and you put those corner pieces in, and then suddenly it doesn't seem quite so insurmountable when you start to get the frame a little bit there, and you're like, okay, I'm not a huge puzzle person, because at first I think it's so fun, and then I get like, oh, I can't do that. But that's just what made me like, if we could put in the pieces that we do know. So I know you mentioned earlier when we were talking, it's helpful sometimes to write down what you know your vision is not also. So what do you not want to do? And then that helps also, even though that's in the puzzle analogy, it doesn't really hang because you don't put in pieces that aren't there, but it is still the idea of framing it out. And that helps okay, here's what I know I want, here's what I know I don't want, and here's the questions that are still open that I need to answer. So you might not know yet about distribution. And then that's one of the things that I love also, the flip side of me being able to have people come to you is if they aren't sure which part of their business is the most profitable and they kind of like each of them equally, or they're not sure because they haven't really gotten too much into retail yet, for example, then running the numbers, to your point, can help you figure it out. Like, I may love farmers markets and I may love talking to people, but if they are not profitable, I may not love it enough to make that my hobby. I might say then, okay, well, if I have an hour and $1 to spend, I'm going to go where I can actually sell my products. And some people, and I say that, but some people might say, this is more of just something I'm doing for joy. And then if they can choose a channel that keeps them just above water, then again, that is okay. Also, it might not fuel big scaling levels of growth, and then that goes back to the vision of what lifestyle do you want and what are you looking for. But framing out that puzzle, I think, of what you know and what you don't know.
I think what's interesting about the puzzle analogy too is made me realize that like the vision doesn't have to be grand, as you're saying, in terms of knowing what type of distribution you want to have. And an exercise that we did inside of our group coaching a while back that actually prompted a couple of folks to go and do the work with you was, you know, if you aren't sure about that ultimate big picture, like you don't have the vision fully rounded out, just do the exercise of what don't I want my day to day to look like, and kind of doing this is what I don't want it to be like. It's almost easier, right? You might know if you don't want to be behind a computer all day. You might know if you don't want to be in the kitchen all day. You might know if you don't want to have your weekends tied up at farmers markets, right? So you could say, here's what I don't want my life to look like. Here's what I don't want my work to look like. And so then once that's sort of removed, I'm kind of thinking of it like you accidentally got two puzzles mixed together and you're putting one together, right? You're like, okay, puzzle pieces that don't belong here, get out. I've identified that you are not a part of this picture. And so now with what you have left, you know, how do you want to create your days and how do you want to create your business? And I think that can be a good first step for people, because I think part of this is that it's very easy to get overwhelmed at the idea of a vision that is something you're wanting to build 5 to 10 years, you know, into the future. Well, what do you want to build today? You know?
And it seems like sometimes, again, that blank page can be really intimidating. So just starting to get some of those things down can really help. And then you can wordsmith into a more concise statement if you're interested.
Yeah.
I'll just give one example that I just was thinking about. So this is not an actual client and it's not wordsmithed. It's just kind of off the top of my head. So bear with me. But if you have a product that you know, okay, so actually I'll take a step back. The problem here is that kids do not have enough good food choices at lunchtime. So if we say that that's the problem, and then my purpose is that my food brand can make some sort of a lunch option easy for caregivers, you know, parents or whoever the guardian is, and something that's really attractive to the kids. So I want to make these foods something that the kids will really want, but then easy for the parents. And then, so that might be my why. Like I need to get better food into the hands of kids. And then the vision might be that I want to get into every kid's lunchbox across the nation at least 3 times a week or something like that, where, you know, so we're talking about kids, we're talking about across the nation, could also be, you know, within Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Just those are some of the levers that we have. And then we try to get specific, like you could say every day if you wanted to be really, you know, all of these things are just levers in that example of who you're talking to. And, you know, is it national or local? What's the frequency? There's some of these things of, you know, once you know what you are looking at doing, you can start to put them in a sentence that makes you think, okay, well, let's actually use the example of Milwaukee. So if I was going, because that's where I'm in the Milwaukee area. So if I was going to say I wanted to get in kids' lunch boxes, you know, multiple times a week here in the Milwaukee area, what are the specific parent groups or Milwaukee Public Schools, or, you know, what are those different places? It helps me start to think already how to get more specific as I start to work on the other pieces of my brand strategy. And here's the nice thing is that even though this is sort of a linear process, you go step by step to peel back the onion, often we'll write something down. And then throughout the whole process, as things become clearer, we'll be like, oh, it's not that wasn't my vision. It's just, here's a better way to say it, or here's a more concise way to say it. So we go back and can refine into that more concise sentence that's easy to share with other people. So again, we just want to get our thoughts down and documented first, and then throughout the whole process, we can refine and turn it into something that can bridge to the external world.
Yeah. So you've got the values, the purpose, and some form of a vision written down. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. So when we first started talking, I mentioned your company, your consumers, and your competitors. And so those are the 3 C's that I really like to think about in terms of a high level framework for people to work from. So that's what my process is based on. And, you know, if you think of a Venn diagram where these overlap, I put a star between the consumers and your company. And some people will say, oh, shouldn't that star go in the middle, intersecting all of them where you typically see the star? And I say, no, because we are recognizing that our competitors are there, but we're really focusing on how you can meet your consumers' needs in a way that they either can't or won't. So we want to recognize them, and then we want to kind of, not leave them out of the conversation, but we're not going to be focused. We're not dwelling on what they're doing. We want to recognize what the, market situation is, but then we really focus on what you do well and your consumers' needs and how to delight them and create loyal fans. So, just briefly, we think about your ideal consumer and what those needs are. Where, people have heard some of these things before, but what kind of psychographics do they have? And I'll explain what that is. So in the past, marketers love to focus on demographics, the kind of hard quantitative data about people, but more and more generations kind of meld together in terms of some of our attitudes and behaviors, and, especially around health and wellness, and where a lot of our brands play. And so it's cool because we don't have to choose a specific age or, geography. I always say it matters if it matters. Like if you are focusing in the Milwaukee area, that matters. If you're focusing nationally, that matters. But otherwise, we don't want to force those things. We can focus more on those psychographics, those attitudes and beliefs and behaviors that really drive people to make decisions for themselves or for their families if they're shopping for other people. So we've got our consumer that we define. We look at our competitors then, and we do that again, not to ever compare ourselves, because the whole purpose of doing this is to stand out. But we need to see what's on the landscape. I can't tell you how many times people have said, oh, I know my competitors. But then when we really drill in, they're like, oh, well, that must be new. Or they just started saying that. Or what the biggest aha is, and I don't fault anybody for this, but we think we know what the landscape is, but then we'll say, oh, the thing I'm saying that I thought was unique is actually this, very similar or not different enough anyway to what everybody else is saying. So it's not that we can't say those things. Sometimes we, have to say it. It's just sort of what's necessary to get in the game instead of the thing that we can hang our hat on as a differentiator. So it's a good foundation. It's a good place to start.
I'm thinking a bit about, so many brands who, when they're testing viability or they're sort of just getting started, they start out in farmers market, which I love. Right. And it's sort of a great first step. And we've talked, I think, with Kat Fields White and a couple other folks on the podcast, that it can be a testing ground. It can be a place to get to know your customer, to get feedback. It can also be a forever location for many brands. But what I'm thinking about now is that you may start there, and then as your vision starts to take shape, like I'm almost wondering, like, how do you make that transition? I think in the beginning, people may have an idea of who their customer is, and it could be wrong, or it starts to get more defined or refined. I've also met a lot of founders who are a couple of years in, and they don't have their customer defined. So is there any sort of additional information or sort of tips that you can provide for how to dig into that component? And the reason I think that's so important is because when we are making sales channel decisions, this is critical, because we need to know where our customers shop. And if we don't know who our customer is, then we don't know where they shop. And so then it becomes very difficult. And we've seen, even with hard financial data, that this sales channel is more profitable than this sales channel, if they're not really sure if their customer actually will show up in that profitable channel, they're afraid to make the move. So I think that these pieces are so intertwined. I would just love if you can give maybe a little bit of guidance for folks to kind of start to think through.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole podcast episode about this, but for now, at least, I'd love to give a few tips of how you can start to think about it. One is, as you mentioned, the more obvious one. What do you already know based on demos or markets or events, surveying your own customers if you have a list that you can ask questions? So that's, I know this is obvious, but you have to say it anyway, about asking the people who are already buying But one consideration is, are the people who are currently buying from you, do you think once you either what you know about them or once you learn about them, are those the people that you think are your ideal consumer, your ideal audience? And you have to kind of figure out over time. You may think it's one thing, and if you keep hearing that it's something else, then you've got a decision to make. Do you lean into what you keep hearing it is, or do you change your product and your positioning because there's this need over here that you originally meant to fill? So talking to people who are already buying is a big one. You can also look for secondary data from sources like Mintel or Nielsen. You can look to understand who's buying at a category level. Now, one thing that is just, again, another watch out is to make sure that if they're talking about general market and you are more of a natural food brand, it might not always line up perfectly, but sometimes they'll break it out, or sometimes you can, extrapolate from the data to help make assumptions. And so that brings me to the third point of making assumptions in general. Hopefully it's informed by something, either what you hear in the marketplace, or even, again, this is totally qualitative, but listening to podcasts like, when I was doing some keto work, listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos about what keto experts are saying. You can dive into a topic if you think that that's maybe one of the interests, even if that's not the only thing about your consumer. If you really dig into some of the things that they might be interested in, what are those sources saying? So again, it's qualitative and directional, but if you start to hear the same things over and over again, like it's hard to get a well-rounded meal on the table quickly because convenience is hard, then you can start to get some insights about the people who you think could be part of that core audience. So I guess I'd like to say make some assumptions, or make a hypothesis, and then find data to, or look for data points that either support it, or also be open to the data points that don't support it, and then see if you have to change your hypothesis.
That's super helpful. And we'll link to the full podcast episode of yours, of the Real Food Brands podcast,
Sure, I'll share that.
For folks to be able to tap into that. Okay. So we have some understanding of who our audience is. And I think, I'll share sort of an example from the work that you did for one of our, I'll call them a shared client, but the person I'm thinking of in particular has a very unique product. And they almost, I think they didn't know who their customer was. They hadn't clearly defined who is this person. And it was hindering not only where they sold their product, but also how they communicated about their product to people. So it seems like having that customer clarification, or that, target, audience clarification, can really help in a number of ways. Not only in terms of where are these people, but how do I talk to them, and what are the things about my product that is really going to resonate with them and be able to help me sell. Katie, thank you so much. It's a valuable process that you have outlined and created for, real food brands and good food brands, as I call them. I too have leaned on you to help me with this, parts of this process in the past. So thank you for that as well.
I love it.
Please share with our listeners where they can listen to the podcast. Number one, find you on social and learn more about your services and your online resources.
Yeah. So for consistency's sake, Real Food Brands at most places. So realfoodbrands.com. On Instagram, it's at Real Food Brands. Those are probably the two key places to go. On my website, you can find podcast episodes. You can also search your favorite podcast player. And I just want to offer that whether it's an email or through Instagram, if anybody has a podcast episode topic related to, a question related to anything that we've talked about today, I'd be very happy to shoot you a link to to a specific topic that would help you most right now, because I have gone through phases where I try to just digest all the information about a topic, and it is, sometimes it can be overwhelming. So I am a big believer in the right information at the right time. And so if I can, send you to a very specific podcast episode, I am happy to do that. Just send me a message and I'll get you a link to that.
Amazing.
So that's it.
Thank you. And then, you're a part of our Good Food CFO community as well. So you can, tag Katie in a comment or, send her a DM here. And for now, we will say goodbye and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You can hear the rest of Sarah's conversation with Katie as a Plus member inside the Good Food CFO community. As a Plus member, you get access to full-length episodes, bonus content, live events like Q&As with podcast guests, and even live podcast recording. And if you have questions for Katie, be sure to join us for our live Q&A on Tuesday, November 7th. For more information, visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show.